Look, I mean, it's a fundamental question. It's an essential question. And it's also a question that while I thought about it and tried to grapple with it, I still feel kind of in over my head with it. It's because once you start down that road, it just opens up all these other corridors and that never seem to end. And maybe I'm overthinking it. Of course, I mean, so far, if anyone's who's been listening to this will think, well, this guy's clearly overthinking it. I mean, I guess I can't help it.
I don't think you are. I don't think you are.
So, I do bring this up in the beginning of the course, in an introductory video, and there, I kind of briefly touch upon this kind of running debate that has, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's been settled exactly, but it used to be much more of a debate about whether video games are art or not, right? That they can even be dignified with that title. And I think the answer is yes. I think that's an easy answer. But then the question is, like you say, how do they relate to other forms of media and art? And my first thought, and this is probably coming out of my training as a Central Europeanist, but also as a musician in my kind of earlier days, is to think about them in Wagnerian terms, kind of as a Gesamtkunstwerk, right? A total work of art, where it necessarily they require, even simpler games require forms of representation that are visual, that are textual, that are sonic, that are haptic. That is, how they might interact with the sensation, the system of the body. If you got like a feedback controller, or even the way that your two hands interact with the keyboard or the mouse, or with a controller or something like that. And there's more than that. So there's all these ways in which to engage in historical video game is to engage on all these different levels in a way that I think is not inherently true for cinema or for textual representation. I mean, of course, there's a lot of debate that can be had about that, which is fine. But you look at the credits in any modern video game, and a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, it's like genuinely 10, 15 minutes of credits. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people have been working on these games across all these axes of media forms, and it takes an incredible amount of coordination to create a modern game because it envelops so many forms of art. Um, but that doesn't answer your question, which is, what are the distinctions? And one of the things that I've been trying to play with is, I think that there are two big distinctions that I want to make. One is that games are fundamentally, at their core, they're systems of rules that are worked through as processes. And I'm drawing here on the work of Jesper Juhl in understanding, kind of the fundamental nature of a game. It doesn't matter what kind of game it is, video or otherwise, right? It's a game because it functions according to the system of rules. And you only proceed through the game as you go through the different steps, as you play through the rules. And that, I think, is a fundamental difference from something like a film or something like a textual representation, which, well, yes, there's a beginning and end to the film. It takes time, right? Same thing with reading. But when you play a historical video game, there isn't a single complete text. There isn't a stable text in the way that there is, like, the book is the book, the film is the film, that if you replayed it every time, it would be exactly the same thing over and over. It wouldn't, none of its components would change. A video game isn't like that, because a video game requires the player to make inputs, to interact with the system. And so every interaction with that system, with that representation of the past that the game purports to have, results in a greater or lesser different outcome, right? So every time that you hit the arrow key or the WASD key and try to get Ezio to run around Florence, even if you ran him around in a circle pointlessly on one playthrough of the game, and you didn't do that on another playthrough of the game, that is a different playing through of the system, and therefore inherently a different representation of the past. It's not a meaningful difference, but it is a different one, in the way that when you watch a film from one viewing to the next, the characters don't do different things. So hopefully that makes sense. That is one way in which they are at a fundamental level different, and that comes back to the player, right? The player is a unique factor in a way that a reader is not or a viewer is not in other works of art, because the text itself can only proceed if the player is involved, and the way that the player completes the system or works through the system fundamentally affects the way that the text is constructed. So there is no stable text. What that ends up doing, I think, is creating a representation of the past that is inherently, and this is something I've been trying to wrestle with, and so I don't know if I'm onto something or not, but um, a representation of the past that is inherently structured around the existence of the player, around the accommodation of the player, in a way that no other representation of the past is. For example, this representation of Florence in Assassin's Creed 2, it is made for the sake of the player, right? The way that the built environment is constructed, the way that the non-player characters interact or don't interact with the character, is for the sake of the character, because there is a player who has to play through the game. You wouldn't have that in a traditional representation of the past, where I mean, it just has a different goal. Hopefully that makes sense. And I think that's that's not a short answer, but that is, I think, the most basic way I can talk about that right now.